From the moment he could remember, life had already placed its weight on his shoulders. He was born in a neighborhood most people only saw on the evening news, usually when something had gone wrong. The buildings were old and tired, their paint peeling like they had given up trying to look hopeful. Sirens were part of the night's soundtrack, mixing with distant arguments and the hum of streetlights that flickered more than they shone. For him, this wasn't a place of tragedy or drama. It was simply home. As a black boy growing up there, he learned early that the world expected less from him. Teachers spoke to him differently. Strangers watched him more closely in stores. Even well-meaning adults often talked about his future with words like if instead of when. If he stayed out of trouble. If he survived. If he was lucky. His mother did her best to shield him from that reality, but she was fighting her own battles. She worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, cleaning offices before sunrise and serving food until late at night. Her hands were always tired, her back always aching, but she never complained. When she smiled at him, it was warm and steady, as if she was silently promising that everything would be okay, even when neither of them knew how. His father wasn't around. Sometimes the absence hurt more than any harsh word ever could. Other times, it felt like a quiet warning: don't become another story people whisper about. He didn't know his father well enough to hate him, but he knew the empty space he left behind. That space followed him everywhere. School was both a refuge and a reminder. He loved learning, loved the feeling of understanding something new, but he quickly noticed how different his experience was from others. Some classmates had tutors, quiet bedrooms, parents who attended every meeting. He had noise, shared space, and responsibilities that didn't disappear just because he was a child. Still, he tried. He tried to stay focused while his stomach growled. He tried to ignore the comments that suggested he wouldn't amount to much. He tried to believe that hard work alone could protect him from a world that seemed determined to push him down. Every small success, a good grade, a kind word from a teacher, felt like a victory he had to defend. Outside of school, the streets taught their own lessons. Friends disappeared into bad choices, some into prison, some into graves. Every loss carved a quiet fear into his heart. He wondered how thin the line really was between where he stood and where they ended up. Sometimes it felt like the difference was nothing more than timing. At night, he lay awake listening to the city breathe. He thought about the future more than most kids his age. Not in the way of dreams and fantasies, but in survival calculations. How to help his mother. How to avoid trouble. How to become someone the world couldn't so easily dismiss. There were days he felt invisible. Days when he felt too visible. Both were exhausting. Yet, deep inside him, something refused to die. It wasn't loud confidence or bold ambition. It was quieter than that, a stubborn belief that his life had value, even if no one else could see it yet. A belief that his pain wasn't meaningless. That the hardships he carried might someday become something more than scars. Sometimes that belief flickered. On especially hard days, it almost went out. When the electricity was cut off. When his mother cried behind a closed door, thinking he couldn't hear. When another opportunity slipped away because of circumstances beyond his control. But it never fully disappeared. He found strength in small moments. In helping his mother carry groceries up the stairs. In finishing homework by candlelight. In choosing to walk away from trouble even when it promised quick relief. Each decision felt small, but together they formed the foundation of who he was becoming. The world had already tested him in ways no child should be tested. And though he didn't know it yet, these early struggles were shaping a strength that couldn't be taught in classrooms or measured by grades. For now, he was just a young black man trying to survive in a place that offered very little mercy. Carrying dreams he was afraid to say out loud. Holding on to hope with hands that were already tired. This was only the beginning. And the weight he carried, though heavy, was forging a strength that would one day change everything. By the time he reached adulthood, He had learned one hard truth: survival didn't mean safety. For a while, it looked like things were finally turning around. He finished school against the odds, juggling classes with work and responsibilities that never eased up. His mother cried the day he graduated, not loud, dramatic tears, but quiet ones that carried years of exhaustion and pride. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe his life was stepping onto a better path. He found a job not long after. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. A uniform, a paycheck, and the dignity of earning his own way. Every morning, he left the house before sunrise, riding crowded buses with people who looked just as tired as he felt. Still, he showed up early. Stayed late. Learned everything he could. Hard work had always been his shield. Then life reminded him how fragile progress could be. Budget cuts came without warning. One meeting. A few apologetic words. A handshake that felt empty. Just like that, the job was gone. No savings. No backup plan. Just a growing fear he didn't know how to name. At first, he told himself it was temporary. He applied everywhere: stores, warehouses, offices, anywhere that would take him. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Each rejection chipped away at his confidence. Some never responded at all. Others offered polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Bills began stacking up like silent threats. Rent notices. Utility warnings. His mother tried to hide her worry, but he saw it in the way she counted money more carefully, in how she skipped meals without admitting it. The guilt weighed on him more than hunger ever could. Then came the loss he didn't see coming. His closest friend, someone who had grown up beside him, shared secrets and dreams, started drifting away. They had chosen different paths. His friend wanted fast money, easy answers, shortcuts that promised escape. When he refused to follow, the distance grew. Conversations became arguments. Arguments became silence. One night, he got the call. His friend was gone. The room spun as he tried to process the words. Gone felt too soft for something so final. Grief hit him in waves: anger, regret, numbness. He replayed every conversation, every moment. He wondered if he could have done more. The streets had claimed another soul, and the pain felt personal, cruel, and unavoidable. That loss broke something inside him. Sleep became difficult. Motivation felt heavy. The world seemed smaller, darker. Everywhere he looked, he saw reminders of how easily everything could fall apart. The future he had cautiously believed in now felt like a lie he had told himself to survive. There were nights he sat alone, staring at the ceiling, asking questions with no answers. Why work so hard if it can all disappear? Why keep pushing when the world keeps pushing back? Doubt became his constant companion. For the first time, quitting whispered to him. It whispered when he passed job postings he felt unqualified for. When he avoided phone calls because he didn't want to explain his situation. When shame made him pull away from people who cared. The idea of giving up felt dangerous but also tempting. Yet even at his lowest, something stopped him. It wasn't hope in the traditional sense. It was responsibility. His mother. His younger self. The promise he made long ago to not become another story of wasted potential. He remembered the boy who did homework by candlelight, who believed pain could have meaning. So he kept moving, even when movement felt pointless. He took temporary work. Odd jobs. Anything that paid something. He learned to stretch meals, to sleep less, to carry grief quietly. Each day was a test of endurance. Some days he passed. Others, he barely survived. But survival was still happening. Though everything had fallen apart: job, stability, friendship, he hadn't completely broken. The cracks were there, deep and painful, but within them lived a strength he didn't yet recognize. The world had taken almost everything from him. What it didn't take was his will. And that refusal to quit, fragile as it felt, would soon be tested in ways he never imagined. The world had seen him struggle. It had watched him fail. But no one truly saw the quiet strength he carried because it wasn't flashy, and it didn't ask for recognition. After losing his job and the friend who had been his anchor, he could have sunk further into despair. Most people would have. He felt the temptation every day. Every rejection, every knockback, felt like a signal that life wanted him to quit. Yet, he didn't. Instead, he worked in ways no one could notice. Early mornings became his sacred time. He woke before the sun, brewed cheap coffee, and reminded himself of small victories: a resume polished, a call returned, a skill learned. He studied online tutorials while others slept. He read books about people who had faced far worse and survived. Slowly, steadily, he rebuilt himself not for applause, but for survival, for his future. His friends, the ones who hadn't left or fallen behind, began noticing a change. Not in the outward things, he was still the same quiet, reserved man, but in the way he carried himself. There was a new resilience in his shoulders, a steadiness in his gaze. His hardships had shaped him, but they hadn't defined him. He had learned to carry pain without letting it dictate his actions. It wasn't just personal growth. He became a silent guardian for others, too. He helped younger kids in his neighborhood avoid the same traps he had almost fallen into. He shared advice with anyone who would listen, sometimes without saying a word, just through example. He became the quiet proof that hardship didn't have to end in failure. At home, his mother noticed too. She watched him take every setback and turn it into determination. She saw him sacrifice comfort for opportunity, work tirelessly without complaint, and carry grief without letting it consume him. He had become the son she always hoped he would be, but in ways that transcended hope. He was strong in ways the world couldn't measure. The secret to his strength was not in avoiding failure. It was in facing it, every single day. He failed, yes. More times than he could count. But each failure was a lesson, a small building block of endurance. He had learned to let go of shame, to focus on what he could control, and to ignore what he couldn't. He had learned that courage was not always loud. Sometimes, it was just showing up when no one else would. Some nights, when he was alone, he allowed himself brief moments of doubt. They were quiet, fleeting, and he never let them linger. Instead, he reminded himself that strength was not about avoiding hardship, it was about surviving it, and even more, growing from it. He thought about his childhood, about the boy who studied by candlelight and hoped for something better. That boy still lived inside him, and he had learned to honor him. He began taking small steps toward rebuilding his life. A friend suggested applying to a program that could help him develop skills for a better job. He applied. He didn't know if he would be accepted, but he tried. Every no along the way was a chance to keep learning, to keep refining himself. Every challenge was a quiet test of his perseverance. What no one saw, what most people never see, was that true strength is invisible. It doesn't announce itself with words or accolades. It grows in silence, in resilience, in the refusal to give up when everything around you insists that you should. He didn't have a mentor, a guide, or anyone cheering him on consistently. What he had was self-reliance forged in fire. He had learned to depend on himself, not out of arrogance, but necessity. He had learned that the world would not hand him opportunities, so he had to create them himself. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, his efforts began to accumulate. Knowledge, skills, connections, all small seeds planted during countless nights of hard work. He didn't yet know how they would bloom, but he felt the stirrings of something greater. Even in his lowest moments, there was a quiet pride in knowing that no matter what happened, he had refused to break completely. That refusal, simple as it seemed, was the most profound victory of all. The world hadn't noticed him yet. But it would. Because strength like his, no matter how silent, eventually demands to be seen. And in that quiet, unacknowledged strength, he found a purpose stronger than any hardship, the certainty that no matter how much life tried to break him, he would always rise again. After years of struggle, the turning point didn't come with fanfare. There were no sudden miracles, no dramatic announcements. It came quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a door opening that he hadn't noticed was locked. He had been applying for opportunities relentlessly, one rejection after another. Each no stung, but he had grown used to them. He had learned to keep going, to keep learning, to keep believing in the small, incremental steps that slowly built towards something larger. One day, a notice appeared for a training program at a company that specialized in the field he had been interested in for years. The position required skills he had been quietly cultivating during those long, sleepless nights. He hesitated for a moment. Doubt crept in, as it always did. What if I'm not ready? What if I fail again? But then he remembered all the nights he had worked without recognition, all the times he had refused to quit, and he applied. Acceptance came weeks later. Not an immediate transformation, not a guaranteed career, but a chance. A small opening that could lead to something bigger. And for the first time in years, he felt the thrill of possibility without the immediate weight of fear pressing down on him. From the first day, he threw himself into the work. He arrived early, stayed late, and asked questions relentlessly. Every task, every assignment, became an opportunity to prove to himself and quietly to the world that he belonged. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was building, creating, shaping his future with deliberate hands. The challenges didn't disappear. He made mistakes. He faced skepticism from colleagues. Some people assumed he wouldn't last. But years of hardship had prepared him for this. He had learned resilience, patience, and the quiet confidence that comes from surviving life's harshest tests. He didn't let the doubts of others shake him. Instead, he used them as fuel, silently proving that persistence mattered more than luck. Outside of work, his life began to shift too. Small things like paying bills on time, finding stability in his routines started to give him a sense of control he hadn't felt in years. He reconnected with people who had drifted away, showing them that he was no longer the same person shaped only by hardship. He was someone stronger, more deliberate, and ready to take responsibility for his own path. The real turning point, however, wasn't just in the external opportunities. It was internal. He realized that the strength he had been cultivating for years, the quiet resilience, the patience, the ability to endure without recognition, was finally paying off. Life wasn't suddenly easy. Hardship still existed, but now he had the tools to navigate it. He had the confidence that no matter what happened, he could face it and emerge intact. One afternoon, after weeks of tireless effort, he completed a major project at work. It wasn't a grand achievement in the world's eyes, but to him, it was monumental. It represented every night he had stayed awake studying, every job he had lost, every friend he had mourned, and every moment he had chosen not to quit. It was tangible proof that his perseverance was paying off. His supervisors noticed too. They began entrusting him with more responsibilities. They offered guidance and mentorship that he hadn't had before. Slowly, the doors that once seemed permanently closed started opening, not all at once, but steadily. Every small success built upon the last, creating momentum he had only dreamed of in those dark nights of his past. And yet, he never forgot where he came from. He knew the streets that had shaped him, the struggles that had taught him resilience, and the people who had been left behind. He didn't rise above his past, he carried it with him, using it to guide, inspire, and teach. Every achievement was a testament not only to his hard work but to the strength born of adversity. By the end of this period, life had not transformed magically. Challenges remained, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But he had discovered something more powerful than luck or fortune, the certainty that persistence, strength, and courage could change the course of a life. The turning point wasn't a single event. It was a series of small, deliberate steps, fueled by the years of unseen strength he had cultivated. And it was only the beginning. Because now, for the first time, he could see that his life, the one shaped by struggle, by loss, and by relentless effort, was beginning to change. And it was only a matter of time before the world would see it too. The day came quietly, almost imperceptibly, the way most of life's profound changes do. No trumpets announced it, no one handed him a medal. Yet everything had shifted, and he could feel it deep in his bones. Years of struggle, loss, and silent perseverance had led him here. The hardships that once felt unbearable had become the foundation of his success. He had learned patience, resilience, and the quiet power of refusing to give up. And now, the world was beginning to take notice, not with grand gestures, but through opportunities, trust, and recognition that he had fought for every step of the way. He looked around at the office where he had started as an uncertain trainee, nervous and unsure. Now, he was entrusted with projects that shaped the company's future. Colleagues respected him, and mentors sought his insights. The boy who had once done homework by candlelight, who had worked odd jobs to keep his family afloat, had grown into a man whose strength was both visible and impactful. But the most profound change wasn't professional, it was personal. He no longer felt crushed under the weight of uncertainty. He had discovered that true strength wasn't just about enduring, it was about thriving despite the scars of the past. He could finally breathe, not because life had become easy, but because he had learned to navigate its challenges with grace and determination. He visited his mother one evening, carrying a small bouquet of flowers, her favorite. She looked at him with tears in her eyes, the same quiet pride he had seen years ago at his graduation, only this time deeper, more assured. "I always knew you would get here," she said softly. He shook his head, smiling. "I only had to keep going," he replied. "You taught me that." The streets that had once tested him relentlessly no longer held the same power over his life. He returned sometimes, not as a boy trying to survive, but as a man who could give back. He helped local kids with tutoring programs, offered guidance to those who felt trapped by circumstances, and quietly became a role model. The lessons he had learned through pain and perseverance became tools for others, a legacy born from struggle. Even grief, the loss of friends and moments he could never reclaim, had transformed. He carried it not as a weight, but as a reminder of life's fragility and the importance of making each day count. Each scar told a story, each setback had built a layer of resilience, and each moment of despair had taught him to cherish hope. People began to notice his presence differently, not just his professional success, but the aura of quiet strength he exuded. He had become proof that hardship, when met with courage, could forge something extraordinary. And yet, he never boasted, never demanded recognition. He understood that strength didn't need applause, it simply needed to exist and be used wisely. And in the most surprising way, his life had opened doors that he hadn't dared to imagine before. Opportunities he once thought impossible, travel, collaborations, leadership roles were now within reach. But the real change was internal. He had become the master of his own narrative. The boy who had once been defined by circumstances was now defining his own destiny. Sitting quietly one evening, reflecting on the journey, he realized something profound: everything had changed, not because life had been kind, but because he had been relentless. Every failure, every loss, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, all of it had contributed to the man he had become. His strength had changed everything. He closed his eyes and whispered a silent promise: to continue, to grow, to help others find their path through darkness. He knew that life would still test him, that challenges would come, and that the road ahead would not always be smooth. But he also knew that he had survived what most thought impossible, and that survival had become mastery. and in that mastery, he finally found peace. Because he had learned the most important truth: the world cannot define you. Hardship cannot break you. Strength, courage, and perseverance, quiet, unyielding, and unwavering, can change everything. The boy who once stared at the ceiling in darkness, wondering if he would make it, had become a man who illuminated the path not just for himself, but for everyone willing to follow. Everything had changed. And it had all begun with refusing to give up.